Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq, with daily insight on the Nasdaq-100 index, or the NDX, which is made up of 100 of the largest domestic and international non-financial innovative companies listed right here on the Nasdaq stock market. The NDX has been the barometer for U.S. large cap growth and also one of the best performing indexes over the last decade and a half, not to mention one of the most liquid index ecosystems in the world. Joining me this afternoon, we have Shawn, Cruz, Manager of Trader Services at TD Ameritrade, to discuss Nasdaq-100 performance with investors focused on tech valuations even after a correction in the index. Shawn, it's great to have you with us. And how is the Nasdaq-100 performing compared to other areas of the market?
So it continues to outperform. And I would say, one, if you're just sort of looking at the charts and you look at what the various indices have done, they've all sort of followed the same pattern. I mean, the NASDAQ was up almost 40% year to date, so they had maybe a little bit more to give back. But I think if you're an investor, it's hard to feel too bad saying, the index that maybe you have been a little bit more invested in had a correction and you're still up about 28 or 30% on the year. So the performance is still relatively strong. You're looking at the S&P 500 up about 2.5% on the year. Then the other two, the Dow is actually down about 5%, and the Russell down about 10% on the year. So even though there maybe has been a little bit of a pullback, it's not like you've seen all your gains for the year completely wiped away. You really just gave back what I think is most of what you made in August and into September, but still performing relatively well on the year.
What's applied volatility on the Nasdaq-100 indicating? Because VIX indicates we're in for some choppiness in the S&P 500 through the end of the year. I would imagine it would be similar for the NDX.
That's one thing to look at. And so there's this rule that options traders refer to as, they're called the rule of 16. And that they say is, look, take that volatility index and divide it by 16. And that actually gives you the expectation for a potential move on any given day in a percent term. So right now, what the VIX on the S&P 500 is telling you, maybe a little bit over 1.5%. The NASDAQ up around that 35 to 40 level is telling you maybe a little bit over 2%, but that's not necessarily calling for any correction anytime soon. I really think we want to make sure what these things are telling you is the expected variance or volatility, and that door swings both ways. So it's not just down, it's actually up or down. So I would say some of the choppy moves we've been seeing over the past week or so, I would expect that to continue at the very least for the coming weeks, if not maybe the coming months, as we get closer into election season. And we're not talking about election day anymore. I think we're not talking about election weeks. So I would expect that to really be a big driver of volatility. And I actually think you might get a small taste of that this evening. I think it's way too early after the first debate to really start saying who we think with any degree of certainty at all is going to win. But I do expect some choppiness out of markets after the debates, when you do get some people claiming who the victor was. But I don't think it's going to cause markets to really break meaningfully one way or the other. I think for the week, you're better served focusing maybe on progress on the stimulus front or any more headlines coming out around COVID and what officials are doing in terms of restrictions.
Yeah, you may want to have a cocktail in hand for this debate, that's for sure. So, Shawn, you're also watching key levels in the stocks, the semiconductor index, of course, and some of the components within the index.
Yeah, and I think it's been something interesting to do a lot this year, and that is when you start to see price levels developing in any of these indices, start looking at some of the components, maybe looking at a certain sector or even a subsector, and see what's going on there. Because very often you do see some of these subsectors or some of these major names start to hit support or resistance levels around the same time. We've discussed that a lot with a lot of these FANG names. Right now, I'm actually looking at some of the semiconductors, and you're seeing, if we just look at the Philly Semiconductor Index, the SOX, that's actually showing there's a little bit of a resistance level it's running up to here, right around 2250. So I think it's something interesting to watch that you're seeing that out of the semiconductors in general. But I think if you actually start looking at some of the individual names that make up the semiconductors, one thing I'm looking at is actually NVIDIA right here around 533. Looks like it's biting up right up against another pretty much well-defined previous resistance level that it hit a couple sessions back. So watching names like that is something interesting to look at. There's also some deal activity out there. There is the deal for ARM Technologies. There's expectation for maybe the potential for some challenges there. So that can be one thing that maybe causes NVIDIA to either break above, or maybe for break above this resistance level, or maybe have this resistance level hold. You see a little bit of a pullback as progress on that deal. Today, they're actually seeing some positive activity. If you look at VMware announcing a partnership with VMware, that's helping NVIDIA today. And also, if you look at VMware, once again, another company, if you just take a look at the chart, this resistance level, this key technical level is even more well-defined going back over the past couple of weeks and months. So I think right now, looking at some of these resistance levels, not the fangs like we're used to, but maybe you can start looking at some of the semiconductors and other components and see if maybe those breaking higher may allow us to maybe start regaining some of that ground we've given up in the past couple of weeks in the Nasdaq-100 overall.
All right, Shawn, great stuff. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.